Welcome everyone to the MAHA Media Hub and welcome to the MAHA Revolution. My name is Tony Lyons. I'm president of MAHA Action, and I'm thrilled to bring together today an incredible group of people, people from all different sides of the MAHA movement. And, we're going to dive into all of these people who are helping to transform our country. And I'd just like to say a few things first. And one of them is that every single day we're told that Secretary Kennedy is a danger to public health, that he's a danger to our country. And every day I'm going to say, and I know all of us are going to say, that he's a danger to a kind of a corrupt system that has failed the American people and that has made our children sick and that has destroyed public trust, while we as a movement and Secretary Kennedy and his whole team are trying to rebuild that trust. So, this is a time when we're fighting back against just incredible smear campaigns, hit pieces, newspaper articles telling us that, Big Pharma is just trying to do the best things for us, that Big Ag is trying to do the best things, that Big Food is, that they're, publishing these companies' talking points when we know these are lies. But what's happening is that most of the American public is starting to understand that they're being lied to. And we're seeing newspapers sort of follow the American people to some extent, that they really have to, that people won't accept the kind of lies that they've been told. They know that the New York Times is lying when they tell us that pesticides are safe, that dyes are safe. And, the MAHA movement is bringing that change to light, is bringing that change into action. And we're seeing from Secretary Kennedy, from HHS, from President Trump, just bold, decisive action that is improving our country. And we're going to just keep coming out and telling the American public that. And I'm so grateful to all of you. There are more than 5,000 people listening here. And all of us are taking part in telling that story. And this includes, activists on the ground, ordinary citizens, people of all kinds who are telling their friends, telling anyone who will listen on social media and anywhere else that the world is changing, that the system was corrupt, and that we're going to really fight to make this country healthy once again. So one of the people who's been fighting that battle so decisively is Callie Means. He's just been an incredible warrior, and I'm very happy to present him here to you. Welcome, Callie.
Thank you, Tony. A couple quick thoughts. I want to say that what Secretary Kennedy stresses a lot is that we're going to get a lot of policy passed. And we've gotten more policy passed in the first year of MAHA than at any time in modern American history. But when I think about the two things I think we should all be proud of, I think of two stories. I was recently speaking to a doctor who's a friend, and she runs one of the largest dermatology clinics in the country. So she manages thousands of doctors, dermatologists. And she says they have statistics where about 5 years ago, the average appointment was 8 minutes long. And most people with dermatology issues, eczema, other skin issues, they would just listen to the doctor, get the medication, go on their way. And now the average appointment is like double. It's like 16 minutes long. And my friend was actually very frustrated with me and with the MAHA movement. She said it's actually an outrage among the doctors in her practice that patients are asking so many questions. And she said now it's like 80% of appointments, there's continued follow-up questions from patients about natural remedies for these skin issues and natural solutions and what the root cause of these skin issues are. And again, she was frustrated, and I asked her, well, are most of these skin issues metabolically based? Are they root cause based? Are they based on food? And she said, yes, but we like to get patients moving along. They're not taking their drugs. They're asking for these ridiculous natural cures. And I do think I think we all feel we want to move faster on the policy level, but it's not an excuse, but it's just true. The federal government's not where you go to for massive, fast change. This is going to be a 10-year battle. But what Secretary Kennedy talks about is, I think the most important thing that we're doing is we're giving those patients the movement. What we're all contributing to is that there are, in every single micro interaction now, patients and parents have the license to ask more questions, and this can keep up for the next 10 years. And patients and consumers demand more change. That cultural change, I would argue, spiritual change is how we're going to change the world. The other stat that I look at a lot is that snacking in America, the Wall Street Journal recently reported, has gone down 7% in 1 year. So while the market is at an all-time high, large food companies, their stocks are actually going down. And we met recently with the large food company CEO, off the record, and they said to us, and we're at battle and we're having a lot of difficult conversations, obviously, but they said to us off the record, to Secretary Kennedy's team, you are right. There is an existential problem. We cannot go on with where we're going with our food. And it is true that every single boardroom in America legitimately is having very robust and very serious conversations to respond to the consumer demand that's happening in America right now, where on a micro level, parents are looking at food labels more, schools are asking about what they're serving their kids. And I just want to say that because we're going to push hard on the policy, but I do think this continued cultural momentum towards patients, towards parents asking more questions, I think we should all be really proud of and continue to push. On the policy front, I want to just steer attention to the dietary guidelines. This is due this year. I don't have an exact date, but these will be coming out. And I would just keep a close eye out for that. This was a key point during the campaign. And, just to give some quick background, the dietary guidelines really go back the legacy to 1992, the Food Pyramid, which was one of the most destructive documents in American history. We all remember the Food Pyramid. I growing up in the 90s, as pretty young in 1992, that was what a good parent followed to serve their kids food. And the base of the Food Pyramid was carbs. It didn't take a strong stance on sugar. It was essentially an ultra-processed food marketing document. It demonized meat. It had, limits on saturated fat. And in the 10 years where the Food Pyramid was released in 1992, the amount of carbs in the American diet went up 20%. So it really showed that Americans actually listened to medical advice and scientific advice, for better or worse. And a lot of our ultra-processed food system and our food environment flowed from this Food Pyramid. But to this day, under the Biden administration, they put out guidance saying ultra-processed food can be healthy for kids. The Food Pyramid, to this day, the food guidelines have never taken a stance on whether ultra-processed food, highly processed food, is bad or good. It doesn't make a difference between them. It still, to this day, says that added sugar for a 2-year-old can be a healthy part of their diet. It still essentially demonizes meat and sources of protein in favor of carbs. So we are working very hard at that. And when the dietary guidelines are released, we're hoping it has two impacts. One is cultural. We want the new guidelines to have the same cultural impact as the Food Pyramid in 1992 had. And it's still being worked out. And I don't. It's just to echo the statements that Secretary Kennedy and other administration officials have said. But I think we can all expect this to take a strong stance on sugar. I think we can expect this to be welcome news for our farmers who grow vegetables, who grow, who are ranchers, celebrating whole grains. And that is something I think we can really and are bonding with farmers on. We want to celebrate whole food. We want to celebrate real food. There's a strong belief that nutrition has become too complicated. And if people we can evangelize whole food. Right now, 70% of a child's diet in the United States is ultra-processed food. In Spain, France, and Italy, that's 10%. So in Spain, France, and Italy, they're eating 90% of their diet whole, fresh farm food. It's less than 30% here. That is going to be a strong message, and not just the cultural impact, but there's then going to be an effort in states around the country, and everyone can get involved in. We need to follow those guidelines and how we procure food for our schools, for our military, for our government buildings, for our hospitals. And there's going to be a lot of activity to follow those guidelines. So I just want to draw attention to something we're very, very excited about. The last thing I'll just say to everyone, I'm right now meeting with a group of 30 state legislators from 30 states. everyone should get involved with their local communities, with their state governments. We had 30 MAHA bills. 30 states passed MAHA bills last year. People on this call, Gary and others, have been testifying, have been strongly supportive of this. But we want to see a absolute tsunami next year of MAHA bills: medical freedom, nutrition education for kids, making sure doctors at medical schools learn nutrition education, cell phones in schools, making sure that addressing the over-medicalization crisis of children and the fact that SSRIs and all these drugs are being rammed down our children's throat, the first defense. Relatedly, recess. Most states have less than 20 minutes of recess. Food label transparency, mold and water in schools. I mean, any ideas we have, we want to see a tsunami of state action. I know Tony is going to be updating on this a lot. We all need to coordinate to pass these bills. So those are a couple updates from my side, but let's keep pushing. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah. So Kelly, that was a great point. And the point is that, this is an epic battle. It's a battle that's going to be very hard to win. It's going to take a long time to win. And we can't expect it to just be from the top down, from the federal government. It's going to have to be from states. It's going to have to be from local activists working, just tirelessly to get things done. But, more than that, like you said, it's going to be a cultural battle. It's a battle for the hearts and minds of parents, of everybody in the country. And that's what's really going to make companies change. And that's what's going to make the government change. And that's what's going to make newspapers have to kind of change, because they're going to recognize that people will not accept being lied to. So, it's a kind of battle that we're going to have to come at from every side. And somebody who has really come at it from a lot of different sides, but, through his YouTube presence, through his 13 million followers, Dr. Berg has just done an incredible job of informing the American public, of educating people so that they can actually begin to make good, healthy decisions for themselves. Welcome, Dr. Berg.
Thanks so much, Tony. And I just want to flank something you said about Big Pharma. I found out Big Pharma actually is paying influencers up to $1,000 a post. $1,000 a post. So you can imagine what's happening right now with the, against MAHA and RFK. But I wanted to flank what Kelly said about the dietary guidelines that are coming out. I wanted to just tell you just a quick story. I when I was in practice, had a patient come in and said, Dr. Berg, your program's not working for me. And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, I did it for 2 weeks. I went on your low carb. I felt great. I did lose weight. My blood sugars got really better. I went back to my normal diet. It came back. This is a true story. So what's happening, especially in the area of food, is that, especially in the area of carbohydrates, we've normalized carbohydrates. And if you look at that food pyramid, what is up to, was it like between 45 and 65% of our calories are carbs, and they're usually in the form of refined sugars and starches, which is sugar when it breaks down to it. So that's really the problem, is we've normalized this and we think that that amount of carbs are normal. And out of all the things that a person can do, out of all the levers that you can press to reduce chronic disease and metabolic disease, low carb is at the top of the list. You can actually reverse diabetes. You can reduce risk of all sorts of things. There's one study that shows that you can actually drop over 40% of liver fat within 2 weeks being in a low carb diet. So the liver is very sensitive to carbohydrates. So one of the really important things that I'm hoping that's going to be on those dietary guidelines is at least a mention of low carbs being an option for reducing metabolic disease, because it's such a heavy, fast action, more actually than vegetables and fruits and whole grains and exercise and these other things. So super important. And, I think, again, with this normalization is, if you just look at blood sugars, and this is a big confusion, normal blood sugars roughly about 80 milligrams per deciliter. But what does that mean? That's literally 1 teaspoon of sugar in all of your blood. But what's confusing is an average person's consuming a tremendous amount of hidden sugar, but yet they might have normal blood sugar because of this insulin thing going on. So that happens for 15 years to 20 years, and then it shows up. So unfortunately, doctors don't really test the fasting insulin, and that would pick it up a lot sooner. But we've normalized, because of these camouflage holes, we normalize carbohydrates so much. One of the most important things that we need to do is to make sure that's at least in the guidelines as for those people with metabolic disease. And I just wanted to give a little education on that, and because it's so important, so people understand the reason why. So thanks, Tony.
Thanks so much, Dr. Berg. It's just an incredible point that people have to learn what's good for them and what isn't good for them. And it's hard when you have dietary guidelines that have been dishonest, that have turned all of it upside down, so that people can't make good decisions, because you can't really exercise freedom unless you have people like yourself and people like so many other people on this call going out and educating the American public. So, the question there is, how do we do that? How do we all get together and make sure that everybody in America understands what really is healthy, what making America healthy means, so that nobody can then take that freedom of choice from them? Not the government, not newspapers, nobody. So next up, we have somebody who I've gotten to know very well, who I think is incredibly wise and thoughtful, and really wants to tell a story that I think is an essential story. And his name is Gavin de Becker. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks so much. What I hope I'll talk about in the brief time that we have, what I want to cover, is that all of us have found ourselves in a situation where we're seeking to persuade somebody that, for example, not all vaccines are the same, not all of them are safe, not all of the diseases are the same, and not all of them are as dangerous as we're told, and not all the science is reliable, et cetera. So we all have people in our lives that we love and care about who we've been unable to reach. And I've done a book now, Forbidden Facts, and the whole purpose of it and the intention behind it is that it is a piece of material, a short piece of material, on which I make no money and Tony's publishing company makes no money. We just want to get it out there. But it's a piece of material that allows people to see vaccines, for example, and other pharma products in the same context that you can see historical things that were debunked falsely, like Agent Orange, for example. Everybody knows that gravity is the force that pulls things to the center of the earth, and that the earth revolves around the sun, and everybody knows that there's no vaccine autism link. Maybe not everybody on this call, but that's the wide belief. And what we don't know, and what very few people can tell you, is if the vaccine autism link was debunked, who debunked it? And how was it debunked? Very few people know that. And the answer is that it was debunked by the Institute of Medicine, part of the National Academies of Science. And that is a private organization. Most people don't know that. It's not a government organization. It is funded occasionally by government, occasionally by pharma, occasionally by other industry. And so what else have they debunked? Well, they debunked the idea that Agent Orange could cause birth defects in Vietnam veterans' children, later to be unbunked. Years later, they debunked the idea that of Gulf War syndrome, later to be unbunked, meaning their debunking was debunked. They debunked the idea that baby powder could cause cancer and has asbestos in it. Now, that's an interesting one I want to pause on for a second, baby powder, because it took the FDA 50 years, 50, to make that public. Johnson & Johnson voluntarily went to the FDA 48 years ago and said, by the way, there's just a little bit of asbestos in our product. It's not a lot. And we wanted to discuss that with you. And the FDA said, well, let's get started to work quickly to determine how much asbestos is okay in baby powder. I've raised 10 kids, so I can tell you for my babies, 0 asbestos would be the right amount for baby powder. But the FDA decided to look at that very carefully, and look at it they did. for more than 40 years before coming back with an answer indicating that maybe Johnson & Johnson's baby powder with asbestos, that's not their endorsement, that's not their ad, we have less asbestos than you think. We don't cause cancer all that often. These are bad taglines. But when did the FDA finally decide that Johnson & Johnson should perhaps reduce the amount of asbestos to zero? That was 2024. That was last year. So this is what we have when it comes to debunking silicone breast implants, debunked as a cancer causer and other disease by the IOM. So what is the IOM? Well, it's this private organization. The head of it makes $1.1 million a year. It looks like a government organization. It quacks like a government organization, and it isn't a government organization. It's a private organization. And if people can understand that Agent Orange, for example, the guy who ordered Agent Orange to be sprayed over fields and jungles in Vietnam was Admiral Zumwalt. He did a study later on, and he took on the Institute of Medicine, and he said he had never seen anything that corrupt in terms of what they had done. Why does he matter? Because he's the guy who ordered Agent Orange, and his own son died from it. He testified before Congress about that. And the point of this book, Forbidden Facts, is that if you can get somebody to accept and believe that the government has a method for creating debunking and for deceiving and for suppressing, when it's about Agent Orange, which nobody's emotionally invested in, then it's a small step to move over to when it's about mass vaccination, for example. I think the hardest thing with vaccines is that so many people we all know, including many people on this call, gave their kids vaccines, maybe even gave them the COVID vaccine, for God's sake, the easiest of all the vaccines to know you ought not give to your children. But maybe they did. And so they're very reluctant. Plus, it's kind of like a religion, as we know. And what I'm trying to do with this book is say, here's something you can read. You get started. You see how goofy the Institute of Medicine is. And yet they're the ones you're believing when it comes to these vaccine products, which are all different. All the children are different. All the diseases are different. Give you a crazy example. The one that must never be touched, the third rail, is, of course, polio. Polio is the worst disease in world history. Not actually, but that's the spin. Polio was completely eliminated by mass vaccination. Not actually, but that's the spin. But if we look today at polio on Earth, entire planet, 8 billion people, how many people died last year from polio? 0. How many had paralysis from polio? 560. And 97% of them was vaccine strain or vaccine-induced poliomyelitis. So our opponents say, well, that's because of vaccination. But how does that account for the more than 1 billion people on Earth who never had the polio vaccine? They have the exact same death rate. Same thing for measles. The same death rate if you had vaccine and the same death rate if you didn't have the vaccine. And so when you look at all of these the way I do in this book, which is the only way to do it, I think, compare the product, are they all the same? The diseases, are they all the same? And then answer the question, how do I want to handle risk for my kids? A very quick final point on this. Parents make risk decisions regarding whether they want their kids to play football because they might get a head injury, whether they want their kids to ride a bicycle at night because they might be injured, whether they want their kids sleeping over at someone's house. All of these are risk decisions that are quite similar to the vaccine and disease decision because you have to weigh the disease and weigh the vaccine. And yet we've never mandated football, and we've never mandated sleepovers, and we've never mandated let your kids go out and ride their bicycle at night if you don't feel good about it in your particular neighborhood. So I want to encourage everybody. First of all, I want to thank everybody because I'm so honored to be here and to be part of what you're doing, and encourage everybody to get this book. It's super cheap I think it's $5 as the ebook version, and get people to read it, and particularly people you care about who need help to get over to where we are in MAHA, and they need help to understand that the government, not just ours, but every government in world history, lies and suppresses and spins and spends a great deal of its energy on getting us to believe certain things, like vaccines could not possibly cause brain damage, which some do in some children. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Tony, for the invitation.
Thanks so much, Gavin. And it's such an important point that, it's the system that is wrong here. It's not food. It's not vaccines. It's not pesticides. It's not drugs. It's the toxic forms of each of those. And it's the one size fits all mentality. And it's the corrupt side of it all. And it's this system that is creates a crisis control mechanism for these big corporations who don't have our best interests at heart, and a government that really isn't looking out for us. So that's what the MAHA movement is really standing up to. That's what we want to change. And we're not going to take every toxin out of every product, but we can lower the viral load. We can lower the toxic load that all of us carry. And that, I think, is going to improve the lives of millions and millions of Americans. And, one of the people who really suffered personally, and he got really sick, and then he figured out how to heal himself, and now wants to sort of come out and spend his life trying to help healing other people, is Dr. Daniel Pompa. Welcome, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Honored to be here. Look, I didn't choose this like many of you. It chose most of us, meaning pain to purpose. Look, I learned years ago, I think by my bricklaying Italian father, that anything that really changes in a big way, you have to change the premise, meaning where people are actually making decisions, right? People ultimately vote with their dollars, but many of us said, right, we have to change the public. We need things to change up here, but we have to change the public's opinion. That's changing premise, because you have to understand what they're buying into now that we have to change. And I spent a lot of time doing that when I've worked with people in the past, but I spend a lot of time even in my teaching looking at premises, because ultimately if a major premise is wrong, everything below it fails. So if you wonder why people believe so strongly in vaccines, there was a premise, a major premise that they were taught that's wrong. And unless you change that root, then you don't change everything else. Look, the premise that they believe in is doctors and drugs heal. That's how you get your health back, right? That's the premise they believe. They put doctors up here, not understanding the real premise of God gave us bodies that heal. And all we have to do is remove the interference and the body can heal. See, they don't understand that premise. They believe that vaccines saved humanity because they believe that premise that ultimately man has the ultimate answer for them. They believe it's just your genetics, right? Oh, you're just unlucky. You had diabetes? They don't believe carbohydrates and toxins are driving diabetes. See, the premise they believe is that somehow they were just unlucky. And by the way, doctors are telling them that even to this day, even as we speak our message on social media, and yet they believe that premise because their parents somehow taught it, because the government taught them, et cetera, et cetera. And if we don't change that, we won't change it. And just like Gavin said, polio, right? The polio vaccine saved the world. That's a premise, right? We have to bust that through, because they won't ever believe the reason they took COVID is because somehow they think the polio vaccine saved everybody, right? So, but we have an opportunity to change that. Here's the problem. Here's what we're up against, right? Eric, you said it. You said that they are paying social media, not like us, but influencers, $1,000. See, they get it because they keep feeding the same messages out there and they're destroying the message. But we have another problem. We have another problem, and it's AI, because see, AI lies. If you punch in anything about vaccines, AI is going to tell you it's the savior. It's the game changer. Seed oils, how healthy they are. They are absolutely, good for heart disease, et cetera. So unfortunately, people believe AI and people believe what they hear on social media. So that's a big problem that we have. That's a mountain we have to climb. And, I think that we have to back each other, because, I see things that they're saying about us, right? That's the other side. And that's what we're up against. And we need to team together, to change the premise. Look, toxin, I call it TER, toxin-induced insulin resistance. When we look at what's really coming against us and causing chronic disease, right? Bobby knows this. It's the toxins. The food is one thing for sure, but toxins are the big driver. It's how I lost my life for a period of time and how many people are getting sick today. See, remove the interference, the body heals. But where are these interferences coming from? Yes, the food that we eat, right? They're coming from the homes that we live. They're coming from the dental work that we believed is good. They're coming from the vaccines that we're giving our kids and even buying into between flu shots and COVID boosters, right? So the bottom line is we have to make that impact. But the only way I've been able to make a difference is when I get people to realize that, wait a minute, we have to change, that premise of your healing and health's going to come from a pill. It's not. And then they can buy into seed oils are bad. Maybe vaccines are actually wrong. Oh, maybe we actually need to give our bodies good food to be healthier. And maybe we actually need to consider that the drug isn't the answer. Oh, how long am I on this medication for my diabetes, doc? For the rest of your life. See, because the premise is wrong and they believe it. So we have to come against this. It's not going to be easy. We're going to come up against a lot of lies like we're hearing with Bobby right now, right? That's all over social media. How wrong he is, how evil he is, the anti-vaxxer that he is. Well, I see some major influencers here, right? But we're going to have to change the premise of all of that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Pompa. This really is such an important problem, which is changing the way people think and really getting people to be open to the idea that they've been lied to, that their newspapers have lied to them, that the government has lied, that these big companies have lied to them, and that we can demand change, and that's how we're going to get it. So, so many people like you who are coming on to this Zoom call and sort of telling their stories, we're all doing it, and I know you're not doing it, like Gavin said too, not for money, not for power, not for fame, but to really begin the process of healing the American public. Because we are the sickest people on the planet. And I've said it many times, but even though we spend 3 times the amount of money that any other of the 30 industrialized countries spend. So, that's just an incredibly bad record. But what we have now, because of people like you and so many other people on this call, is a time where we can really make change. And, so one of the people who's really been a beacon of hope is our next speaker, who is traveling all around the world. He's talking to groups of 3,000 people, 6,000, 9,000, 12,000, really just getting out there and giving a kind of a gospel to people all around the world. And that is Dr. Gary Brecka. He's really just been this beacon of hope, this idea that it's possible to make yourself better, stronger, that you can be the ultimate human. You can live even to 150 years old. Tell me if that's true, Gary.
I believe that'll be true soon, not if we follow the current food pyramid. But just one correction, I'm not a physician. I'm not licensed to practice medicine. I'm a human biologist. But you're right. I have been on an insane travel schedule. This is my 14th city in 18 days. I was in Australia. I was in London, Singapore, Dubai, Los Angeles, and also in Sydney and Melbourne, and I spoke to voluminous audiences. What's kind of fascinating is that people seem to fall into kind of 2 camps on this issue. One is this camp that somehow the science is fixed. It's not up for discussion. It's over. And that science is valid. It's concrete. It's irrefutable, and it's now on the shelf. And any question of that science is, you're a vaccine denier or you're a pseudoscientist or what have you. But the interesting thing is that the entire premise of science is based on a question. All good science is driven from something called a hypothesis, which is essentially a question. You pose a question, and then you conduct a trial, randomized clinical trial, peer-reviewed trial, or a large data trial to prove your hypothesis right or wrong, and then that should be repeatable. And when science is fixed, this is when things become very, very, very dangerous. If the science was ever fixed in time and we just looked at the last century of science, we'd still be using leeches. We'd still be doing frontal lobotomies. That was actually frontline science for mental illness, where you actually stuck an ice pick into the eye and scrambled the frontal lobe of the brain. It was a common practice as recently as the 1940s, by the way. This isn't, this isn't even Civil War era. or the before Christ era. This was just in this last century. OBGYNs wouldn't be washing their hands before they delivered babies because we didn't know about the microbial transfer. So science should never be fixed. It should be questioned. The very foundation of science being the hypothesis, and the fact that the MAHA movement and Bobby Kennedy are asking questions should be welcome. It should be a delight that we're actually asking these questions. And I think the absence of these questions becomes very, very dangerous. But what's really interesting is if you look at big data and science, there are some absolutes. There are some absolutes in humanity that don't involve chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals. Some of the absolutes that all human beings can benefit from: sense of community and purpose, mobility into later in life, and a whole food diet. Blue zones have proved this. Multiple research studies have proved this. It's fascinating that when I discuss getting physical education back into the public school system, how politicized just that has been, how physical education can be more divisive. And it's mind-numbing to me. There's a very interesting 2024 study that was done out of Taiwan. It looked at 2 million children. It was the largest study done to date on physical fitness and mental health in our youth. And they found that for every 30-second improvement in a simple 800-meter run time, children had a 3% reduction in the risk of developing anxiety and depression. What's more impressive is that in this finding is that for every 30-second improvement in 800-meter run time, this was related to an 8% risk reduction in attention deficit disorder. So when children improved their physical fitness, even by a minute, we saw up to a 16% reduction in attention deficit disorder and other mental illness risks. They show that cardiorespiratory exercise is the #1 most effective drug treatment for ADHD, with some effects are comparable to medication. So it means if we get our kids in schools moving consistently and active, they're significantly less likely to run into mental health challenges like anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, OCD, poor attention span, learning disabilities, disruptiveness. When kids were actually grouped by performance quartile, they found that 12 in 1,000 children of the worst performing quartile developed attention deficit disorder at alarming rates. In the highest performing quartile, they had significantly lower rates of these kinds of mental illnesses. Their little minds were racing. So pharma says, let's put amphetamines into their system and break their central nervous system to match the pace of the mind. So in the last 5 years, there have been a lot of studies that have actually looked at this in classrooms, looking at students that had more time to be physically active. Researchers found that students have better reading scores after they've had movement breaks. Very simple. The best part about adding back exercise into our schools is that it costs nothing. It requires no extra equipment. In the US right now, only 8% of our teens actually meet basic physical activity guidelines. And as a result, 25% of our teens are now classified as pre-diabetic, and type 2 diabetes is increasing in youth at a rate of 5% a year. We're seeing adult chronic illness in children at unprecedented rates. And to combat this, students need 30 to 45 minutes of movement, just moderate intensity activity 3 times a week. It doesn't need to be extremely strenuous. It can be something like light jogging and movement. Activity games are excellent ways to engage children, build community, and actually improve classroom performance. And it builds executive function. The skills in the brain that control planning, self-control, working memory, and mental flexibility. There was a massive meta-analysis done on which looked at 44 studies, had over 1,700 children participants, and found that exercise intervention alone had the most impact on critical life skills. Activities like requiring quick reaction time, the probability of being effective at an intervention better than any other behavioral treatment studied. The 20-week cardio exercise program with 109 children showed remarkable cognitive gains, improvement in crystallized intelligence, 33% improvement in math and problem solving. And so with nearly 2 million children that have been studied, the data just couldn't be clearer. We have to prioritize movement and fitness in children to ensure a healthier, smarter country. And these are interventions that cannot be patented. They can't be marketed. You can't build $1 billion industry around them. And the second thing we have to do is never stop asking the question. I think it was Aristotle that said, all men desire to know. And the loss of intellectual curiosity, in my opinion, is the end of humanity because it ends innovation. And the fact that we are asking the questions, to me, means we are on the right side of this movement. And so thank you for your time. And I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Mehmet Oz, who he doesn't know this, but he's been a mentor of mine. I've read and followed him for decades. And the fact that we have champions like this now that are embroiled in this fight at the government level, to me, is one of the greatest blessings of this movement.
I'm on. My gosh, that was pretty fast.
Dude, did you see my brilliant introduction? Come on, man.
I left the meeting with 100 people. I just walked in here. I heard you talking.
I was just singing your praises.
I thought I was listening to one of your social media posts. I want to thank everybody. I know you've had a lot of great folks speaking with you today. It's an interesting time in Washington. You would think we'd be less focused on work because no one around us is able to work, but interestingly takes the opposite tension, because you've got to cover for folks who are not allowed to come to work. And there's lots of issues that we feel compelled to move forward on. The Secretary and I have been doubled down on a bunch of issues that have been challenging. But I'll tell you what, at a high level, one of the things that we know we can do differently is make it easier to be healthy in America. And one of the ways we'll do that is to make medications more accessible. And I touched on this briefly in a bunch of media pieces over the last week, but I want to be very transparent with each of you. There was a lot of concerns raised about how we're going about the most favored nation drug pricing, in part because some of the companies we're working with are not companies that folks in the MAHA movement have thought highly of. I would challenge all of us to revisit what has gone down in the last 5 years. Much of what happened during COVID was frustrating, angering. I certainly faced it. Many of you did as well. We didn't think we could say what we thought was happening. And there are many times when there were solutions that were developed that not everyone agreed with, especially when they were mandated upon us. And I use that as an example because what we're trying to do at the most favored nation pricing is actually go to everybody involved in the healthcare system, starting with pharma in this case, but we've done similar things with insurance plans who are concerned about prior authorization, which many of you detest because you have that precious covenant with a doctor that you're in the middle of consummating, talking to, and all of a sudden the long arm of insurance comes in and tells you can't get that treatment because you didn't get permission. You say, well, I paid my insurance bill. Why do I need your permission? And this is frustrating for doctors who spend 12 hours a week dealing with this kind of paperwork. It's irritating for insurance companies. They actually spend equal number of hours with their doctors contesting the doctor taking care of you. And the whole thing is sort of a zero-sum game, doesn't go anywhere. So we've approached all these companies in different ways. Secretary and I approached the insurance companies and told them, listen, if you don't fix this problem with prior authorization, we're going to fix it for you, and it won't be as nice. So once you create a more nimble solution, you're in the business, we're giving you permission, go out there and come up with better ideas. And they have done that. And they're on a timeline. They've got to prove that they can deliver, but they promise us they're going to have less procedures that they do prior authorization on. They're going to work faster to give those concerns to doctors and the people that the patients they're taking care of, so that folks can react in a more timely fashion. More recently, we had those conversations with pharmaceutical companies. And as some of you saw last week, we got a leading U.S. company to agree to pricing their drugs at most favored nation pricing. That's an important milestone because the president has argued that there's no excuse for Americans buying a product made in this same factory with the same machinery, with the same ingredients, and packaged in the same box, being sold at 1/3 the price in Europe as it's sold for here. And so we've gotten several of these companies, we're going to be rolling them out one by one, to agree to selling in the U.S. Products that are the same price as they are priced in other parts of the world. It's going to be uniformly the case for Medicaid patients, which will take a lot of heat off governors. For folks who are on medications, for example, you're on a medication to reduce your diabetes risk. And while you're trying to lose weight and exercise and get back into life, it turns out that if you actually have your hormones way out of whack because you're diabetic, it's hard to do those things. So using medications to address some of these issues while you're adopting new lifestyles is a belt and suspenders approach to getting you healthy again. And the Medicaid population has a disproportionate number of people who have those issues. But now we're beginning to get these prices to come down for Medicare, and these companies are promising us to do the same thing with a lot of their medications. And one thing that you probably haven't heard about is there's going to be something called Trump RX, which is where all these different pharmaceutical companies can sell their products at the lowest price available anywhere in the country. So you don't have to guess who's actually got the best price. You don't have to go shopping from pharmacy to pharmacy or different vendors or different pharmacy benefits management companies, or if you don't trust your employer's insurance policy, you don't fall prey to bad pricing there. Now you can just go to this one website. It's going to be a marketplace. You're going to find whatever drug you're taking is best price in the country, and the site will direct you to the places you can buy it. We're not going to sell the drugs. The government doesn't want to be in the business of selling medications. We just want to tell you what the prices are around you so you can pick the best option out there. It'll also be part of a larger story, which is they'll allow transparency in the healthcare system to guide you. Because if we don't empower the American people, which is an important part of MAHA, if we don't make you the world expert on your body and arm you with information to act accordingly, you can't actually take care of yourself to the best of your ability. And who is the best person to take care of you? It's you. Who loves the kids most? The parents. Arm them with information. They take good care of their kids. And same for the grandparents. So we're trying to change the dynamic and allow folks who we know are vested to do the best they can to take care of themselves. And I think these stories, as they begin to build, and we're building, as Secretary Kennedy often says, you build trust brick by brick. We are building the house of trust with all these bricks, with radical transparency at every level. So as much as I can tell you, certainly as soon as I can tell you everything I know I do, and all of us within the agency are trying to do that. It's true for Marty. It's true for Jay at NIH, Marty, of course, at FDA. Our belief is that with this approach, even if you don't want to always hear the information, it'll be there for you. And as doctors, and Jay and Marty are both doctors as well, we're used to telling people things they don't always want to hear. But if you respect us and trust us because we're telling you our best information, then you can get your arms around even bad news and act responsibly to overcome it. And the beautiful part about being in America today anyway, is we do have innovation that is remarkably rapid. Part of the reason that these most favored nation drug pricing negotiations are so challenging is we want to make sure that we don't push companies to stop innovating. We want everyone to continue to build the best solutions possible, because right now we actually do outperform everybody else. If you look at someone diagnosed with cancer in the United States versus that same advanced cancer, for example, in Europe, our survival rate's dramatically better. And that's because you have access to everything out there that could possibly offer to save your life. The best diagnostic tools, the best procedures to address the problem, the best medications to treat the cancer, whatever the issue is. So I encourage you to at least have optimism around that as we go through this process. I appreciate you for supporting Tony and all the other wonderful folks who've come on today. And I wish you the best. Back to you, Tony. By the way, it was good seeing you at the Army-Navy Club yesterday. We had a good friend, Sean Spicer, who he was promoted to the rank of captain of the Navy, which is now holding over all of us. But Tony was there celebrating with him.
Yeah, he was great. Seemed really happy. Good to see you there. Yeah, I think that the points that you're making, the point that every person in this country has to become the world's leading expert in their own body, and that they have to have access to information that allows them to make good decisions for themselves, for their families, primarily for their children. And that if we do that, then the whole country is going to begin to heal. And then companies are going to have a lot of pressure put on them from below, not from the government forcing them, which is always hard to do, but from the demand side, where people are just going to say, I don't want seed oils. I don't want toxins in my food, in my drugs, in my vaccines, in my pesticides. I want things that are healthy. I'm willing to pay what they cost because I know that in the long run, that's going to save me money, that I'm going to lead a happier, richer, healthier life. And, so that I think is really fundamental to the MAHA movement. And you've been just such an incredible part of that, which is, helping to give people the information that's going to make it possible for them to lead better lives. And, that I think is critical to all of this. So thanks.
Take care.
So the next person coming on is Nina Teicholz, and she's been at the center of investigating food. What kinds of food are actually healthy, looking at the food pyramid as it has been for the last 20, 30, 40 years, and recognizing that it's just been upside down and that we can do much better, that the American public has been lied to, and that this is a time when we can begin to fix that. So welcome, Nina.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you so much for having me. So I want to pick up on something that you said, which is that people have a choice about what they eat. And to continue this conversation that's been having, Callie talked about it, and also Dr. Eric Berg, about the dietary guidelines. The dietary guidelines are a very top-down policy. They are the single most influential policy that affects what Americans think is healthy, but also what is served Americans who don't have choices, like kids in public schools, like people in nursing homes, food in hospital, the food that is given to the military in mess halls. We have an obesity problem in the military that is almost the same as it is in the general population, which is extraordinary. The food baskets for women and infant children, all that food is really dictated by this policy, the dietary guidelines. And as Callie mentioned, they still recommend 6 servings of grains every day, including 3 servings of refined grains. Up to 10% of calories is sugar, 5.5 teaspoons of seed oil every day. We don't know what will change in those guidelines, but the one thing I really want to point out to the audience is that by law, the guidelines have to serve the general public. So when the guidelines were launched in 1980, the public was largely healthy. Obesity, diabetes were not epidemic at that point. Now the public estimates are 60 to 93% of the American public has some kind of chronic disease. Adults have some sort of chronic disease. That means that it is super important for the dietary guidelines to have an option for people with those diseases. And so what I'd like what I'm asking people to advocate for is to include an option in the guideline for people with chronic diseases. The option with the most clinical trial evidence. So when Gary Brecka was talking about the importance of clinical trials, you test a hypothesis in an experiment, you see what comes out, you replicate it. The most significant scientific body of evidence really supports a diet lower in carbohydrates for, as Eric Berg said, for reversing type 2 diabetes, for reversing non-alcoholic liver disease, for reversing hypertension and other cardiovascular risk factors. So this is a diet. It can be vegetarian, it can be omnivore. Nobody's saying exactly how it needs to be followed, but it really is supported by the largest body of scientific evidence. That was recognized in the MAHA Commission report. The assessment had a whole paragraph on low carbohydrate diets. And so we put up a website. It's called lowcarbmaha.org, and you can see materials there that you can share. There are graphics. It's just asking for an option, not a mandate for all Americans, but an option in the guidelines for people with chronic diseases, given that the general public is now unhealthy and has one of those chronic diseases. And that option needs to be there so that for all the people, 1 in 4 Americans who don't have a choice about what they eat, but are getting their meals from one of the USDA food assistance programs, like school lunches, there needs to be an option for those Americans that will reverse chronic disease. And this is the single most influential policy that I think this administration will pass in terms of nutrition and food, because it's such an influential policy and affects so many programs. So this is a time to try to ask for an option in the guidelines for people with diet-related chronic diseases. So Tony, thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, thanks so much. And it really is critical that, like I said before, people can get the information so that they can make better decisions. And you've taken such an incredibly big part, such a central role in sort of being the evangelist for changing the way we look at food. And I think this is going to be a period where you're really going to start getting through to people. You wrote a book, I think, in 2014. So you've been at this for a long time. And I'm really hoping that this is going to be not only your victory lap, but the victory lap for millions and millions of people in this country who've just gotten information that is incorrect and then made decisions based on that information. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Tony.
So next up, we have somebody who has been fought through all of the COVID years, went on to Joe Rogan, had 50 million people listen to him, was part of the real transformation of the American public, where they just started to recognize, that they'd kind of had enough. They weren't going to take it anymore, that they saw that they're serious people, serious doctors, serious scientists who have a different point of view, that it's okay to have a different point of view, that it's okay to begin to think for yourself, and that, our role, all of the roles of the people on this call, the people listening to this call, are to make it possible for people to get good information and then make good decisions for themselves. So Robert Malone has been doing that day after day. Welcome, Dr. Malone.
Thanks, Tony, and apologize for broadcasting from the car. I hope that's coming across okay.
Yeah, it's good.
Good, super. I'm on the way to another conference for the IMA group. So Tony asked me to talk a little bit about the pressure that's happening on social media and in a variety of other media channels against the MAHA movement, against Secretary Kennedy, against Dr. Oz, and against those that are speaking truth to power. It's very clear that we're having an effect, our little band of revolutionaries, because of what we're seeing in the response in media and in social media. These various petitions that, when you look into them, they're really kind of nothing burgers. I'm really not too concerned about what Southern California shrinks have to say about Bobby Kennedy. I think that's a group that ought to look at itself a little bit more, and about things like their challenges in dealing with transitioning children, for example. So I think we need to take things in context and think about who's broadcasting these messages. The force of the propaganda that's coming at us has increased. I see that all the time on social media. I see that in the form of paid influencers, as was discussed earlier. I see that in the various chats and bots that are attacking all of us in this movement that have any significant social media presence are just being subjected to an onslaught of attacks and ridicule and defamation and attempts to delegitimize us. That's a sign that we're winning, okay? They don't do that if they think that you're consequential. We're having an impact, and I want to leave you with that key thought as I transition now to the issue of what's going on at ACIP. I hope you all recognize that Deputy Secretary Jim O'Neill has taken a huge leap in accepting the recommendations from the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices and endorsing the idea that, as Secretary Kennedy had suggested he would do, we're not going to take vaccines away from people, but we are going to strongly support that they have their own authority, their own autonomy, their own opportunity for informed consent to make a decision about whether or not taking those products is a good idea for them and their children. We now have won that battle, and what's not often discussed was the very strong positions taken by both ACIP and Secretary O'Neill in favor of true informed consent disclosures. This is akin to what the Secretary has said with the advertising for pharmaceuticals, that they're going to have to start disclosing what the true risks are so that people can make informed decisions. So in closing, guys, this little band of rebels is making a difference. We're having an impact. Don't get discouraged by all of the hate and venom and various forms of verbal violence that we're being subjected to. This shows that we're making progress. As they like to say, if you get a lot of flack, it means you're over the target, and we are absolutely over the target. So stay on track, keep going, and don't let the you know who get you down. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Doctor. And it's really, really great to have seen what you've done and what you keep doing day after day. You're always traveling somewhere new. You're like Gary Brecka, going all around the world, never stopping day and night. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
So next up, we have Dr. Alexandra Munoz. She's a molecular toxicologist. She holds a PhD in molecular and genetic toxicology and is really looking at the toxins that cause cancer and other chronic diseases and is trying to protect the American public from those toxins and trying to help all of us make sure that laws don't get passed that give liability shields to companies that want to poison the American public. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me today. Hi, everybody. I am a toxicologist, and I've been incredibly concerned about the fact that pesticide and chemical manufacturers are trying to get immunity. They have a piece of legislation. They have a number of sections in different legislation in Congress right now that can give them immunity. We had been talking a lot about Section 453 because that language was added to the appropriations bill back in July, and that would give these companies de facto immunity from any type of lawsuit when their chemicals create cancer or any type of disease like Parkinson's disease. If they don't warn about it, people wouldn't be able to sue them if this went through. So it's incredibly concerning. The appropriations bill that piece of legislation, that section was added to is stalled right now because of the government shutdown and because of other things that are happening with funding the budget. But these chemical companies are not giving up, and now they are looking for another vehicle to add their legislation to. So they have some language I've received a tip that's been confirmed by a number of people that the House Agriculture Committee is planning to add language to the 2025 Farm Bill that would give these chemical manufacturers immunity, and another section that would also block states from creating their own regulations to protect localities from aerial spraying or spraying near schools, things like that. So there's a very concerning language that cannot be added to the Farm Bill, but that is currently slated to be added when they bring this bill up. And we don't know the exact timing of it because of everything that's going on, but it's really important that right now we let the House Agriculture Committee know that nobody wants this language added, that Section 10204 and Section 10205 cannot be included because it's just simply unacceptable at this point. It will shield chemical manufacturers and then really open the door for this industry to bring even more dangerous chemicals forward without any mechanism of accountability. They can bring things that now they might not have thought to bring to market before because it would have too much of a liability risk. But if one of these sections goes through, then they can bring things forward that they know are really dangerous, that could harm the fertility of an entire generation, and that could do so many other terrible things. So we need both of those sections removed. The other section, Section 10205, will block states from creating their own regulations for pesticides. So any type of ordinance that's been passed in your community, for example, that notifies you if pesticides are being sprayed, that would be canceled if Section 10205 went through. If you have any type of ordinance that blocks pesticides from being sprayed at schools or in certain residential areas, or if it's blocking aerial spraying in your neighborhood, all of those things would be removed by Section 10205. And so it's preempting states' rights to regulate within their own governance. And it's also blocking, removing many efforts of many parents and concerned citizens and community members that have taken the time to get these ordinances passed in their communities. So it's incredibly important that we get both of these sections removed from the Farm Bill, ideally before they even release the text from the House Ag Committee. So in the action kit that you're going to get after this call, there's going to be a tweet that you can retweet that will tag all of the House Ag members that are considering adding this provision in. And we just want to get their attention and let them know that that MAHA is not in support of this language. MAHA is not in support of giving chemical manufacturers any type of immunity. And we're not in favor of freezing labels in place with old science, which is also what this provision would do. And we're certainly not in favor of removing any types of provisions that are protecting families and communities from exposures to pesticides. So that is our next step here, is we've got to get this language out of the House Ag Bill, and we've got to make sure that all of the representatives on that committee understand that this is an issue that we care about and that we are watching what happens with the language here. So that is the update of what's going on from the Hill. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks so much for coming on. Sorry about that. So, we all know how important the work you're doing is, because we saw what happened with liability shields with vaccines in 1986. We saw that we went from something like 7 vaccines for a very small number of viruses to getting 73 for some states or 92 for other states. That once you have a liability shield, whether it's for vaccines or pesticides or for anything, for any toxin, you're just going to have, these are companies that are trying to maximize profits. That's what they've always done. That's what they're going to continue to do. And we need a system in place that prevents them from doing that and that alerts the public of what the dangers are, so that we can have it coming from both sides, so that people can make better decisions and the government does some work to protect us, not to protect these companies that are poisoning us. So thanks so much for all the work that you've been doing.
Thank you.
So our next guest has, like Dr. Pompa, had her own health journey, and she chronicles that, really, really well, really beautifully. She brings a unique perspective that, combines pop culture and a kind of a wellness warrior mentality. Just really powerful, courageous, and advocating for people's right to choose what to do with their own bodies. So important, so critical. Really grateful to have you here.
What an introduction. That is incredible. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. Maha. I love RFK Jr. I'm so excited about this administration. It has been incredible to just witness that the fact that vaccine injury is actually a topic of conversation. Finally, we're not crazy people. We don't have tinfoil hats. It's a great feeling. So, Tony, thank you so much for having me. So most of you probably don't know my story. So I was severely injured by the Moderna vaccine. After the first shot, I had a reaction, a muscle spasm in my right flank that didn't go away for weeks and weeks. So I went to the hospital thinking maybe it was an organ, because I could not get this muscle spasm out. I went to the hospital, I did a run of tests, nothing indicated anything. And then the following week, I got the second shot. So I got 2 doses of Moderna. And after my second dose, my health was ripped from me. They had no idea what was going on with me. It was all in my head. I had MS, or I had transverse myelitis. The list goes on and on. I'm still an anomaly now. They kind of still don't know exactly what kind of autoimmune issue I'm dealing with. But I have been really just, fighting for my life. I just got back from CPI stem cells in Tijuana. What an incredible facility. They work with all the UFC fighters, and they have this technology and caring doctors that can really kind of nip, autoimmune diseases in the bud, cure cancer, things like that. It's one of a kind. It definitely was a painful journey afterwards. I flared afterwards. I have a flare in my rib cage. But today, I actually feel like I'm back to myself again. But this whole experience has just truly brought me closer to God, and I'm so, so grateful for that. But I have to say to the people that are out there getting boosters out of spite, don't do it. Don't do it, because it's been 4 years for me, and it has been hell, and my body hurts always, and I can't dance anymore. and not forever. I know I will heal, and I know that this will leave my body. But it has just been quite a crazy journey. So that's my story about my vaccine injury. Any LA peeps, if you are in town this weekend, October 12th at 11 a.m., there's a new film called An Inconvenient Study, produced by ICANN and Zal Bigtree. It is the study about the unvaxxed and vaxxed children that has not been published. And I'm very, very excited that this film is coming out, and Big Pharma is not. So you can get your tickets. You can go on my Instagram at I am Jessica Sutta. It's the Malibu Film Festival. We'd love to have you there. And also there's a VIP reception following after, and we'll all be there. Hopefully. I just heard that one of the towers in Nashville is no longer working right now. So we'll see if I'll be able to fly out. So fingers crossed. But yeah.
Thanks so much, Jessica.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, there are clearly just so many people all around the world fighting. There, more than 5,000 people listening to this call on multiple platforms, and just a great group of speakers. Grateful to all of you for coming on. And there are a bunch of things we would like you all to do and to think about. And one of them is that the toolkit that we send out. So it's the MAHA toolkit. And we want you to really to look at that closely and to look at all of the things that are asked of you there. So if 5,000 or 6,000 people post things to their social media, we have incredible power then. So, this is literally hundreds of millions of people. And, we can get our messages out. We can't expect the mainstream media to tell the truth. They work for big pharma, big food, big ag. They don't work for us. So we're creating what we hope is going to be a real powerhouse here where, we're able to work for the public, really help people make better decisions, demand that the government do a better job, demand that politicians do a better job, and, make newspapers and companies pay if they don't tell the truth and if they don't provide products that are safe. So one of the things you can also do is there's a pesticide injury accountability act. So we'd like you to read about that, post about that. And then, there are a couple of other things that I'm going to add in, but one last thing is that we want you all to go to mahaaction.com, look at our website, look at all the different things that we're doing, help us change the culture of the United States. I think it's possible now. I think we're doing incredible work. There's so many people who will tell you that we're not, but we really are. All of you are. Just people all around the country, all in, working hard all the time, often for no pay, often, really long hours. So I'm so incredibly grateful to all of you for the work that you're doing. And I think we can win. This is a revolution. Look at our Substack, go to our website, come to these calls, and let's change the United States. Let's make America healthy again. Thanks so much.